Amen. Well, we got through with that without any immersion. Nick Wester, come on up and I'm going to let Nick introduce himself because I know I fumbled up.
Okay, yeah, as Brother Brett said, my name is Nick Wester. I am the youth director at the Princeton Church in Princeton, Indiana. So for those of you that don't know, that's about 45 minutes north of here. That is a recently constituted church plant through the North American Mission Board, through the Southern Baptist Convention. We planted it, me and my two parents, my mom and dad. We're the first original charter members of that church about 6 years ago. And now we're going pretty strong, and we got our own building, and actually we're on our second building because we outgrew our first one. So God has been blessing in amazing ways. So I am not a seasoned preacher at all, but I was graciously asked by Brother Bob to come and give a message today. So hopefully you will enjoy it. At my church, like I said, I'm the youth director, so I really enjoy working with the youth. I'm also the piano player, and I work with the children. Right after I finish playing, I rush to the children's church and help them with that stuff. So definitely be in prayer for my church today, as they're missing a piano player, a youth director, and somebody that's working with children. But God will provide there, I'm sure. So today's message, the title of it is, Are You Missing a K? So that's not going to make any sense right now. That's fine. Just let that sink in for a while. And as we progress through the sermon, it'll hopefully make a lot of sense. So just to give you a little bit of overview of this sermon, it takes place in the Old Testament. So that's the first half of the Bible, or not half, it's actually a lot more than half, but it's the beginning part of the Bible. And it is based on the story of the Israelites and their journey out of Egypt and towards the Promised Land. So we will eventually be in Numbers 13, starting in verse 25, but I've got a bunch of other passages that I'm going to cover really quick, but you guys won't have time to probably flip through those, so if you want to start looking for Numbers 13, 25, we'll get there eventually. So first, I'm going to set some context. The Israelites had just been held captive in Egypt for the last 430 years, and that's kind of like where our story picks up here. And through God, Moses performed 10 different plagues, and that was used to help free the Israelites. And those plagues were, the first one was turned the Nile to blood, then frogs covered the land, then gnats covered the people, then flies filled the houses, then Egyptian livestock died, then boils broke out all over the people, hail beat down the crops, then locusts ate the crops, then darkness covered the land, and then every firstborn son died. And then that's what we call the Passover. So the Passover was where all the Israelites that followed God's command took lamb's blood and they covered their doorpost, and then the angel of death passed over the house. And so the Israelites saw all these things. They saw these 10 plagues that I just listed out. But then they saw something else once they exited Egypt. They saw a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire for guidance. So if we go to Exodus 13, 21 through 22, it says, By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. In verse 22 it says, Neither the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So we see that these Israelite people had something in front of them at all times that they could see, right? So all the Israelites saw these 10 plagues, and they saw this pillar of cloud by day and this pillar of fire by night. But then we see that they see something else. They saw the Red Sea parted and the Egyptian armies halted. So in Exodus 14:21, we see the Red Sea parted, and it says, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So they saw the sea part, they saw the dry ground, they saw the walls of water, they saw the pillar of cloud, they saw the pillar of fire, they saw these 10 plagues, and then they saw the Egyptian army halted. In Exodus 14:25 it says, And he took off the chariot wheels, this is he meaning God, took off the chariot wheels, so they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." I love this passage of Scripture because there's a little bit of sarcasm in here, and we don't think about God being sarcastic, but there's a few places in the Bible he is. And in this it says, "And he took off the chariot wheels, so they drove them with difficulty." That's kind of a redundant statement. If you are driving your car and all of a sudden all of your wheels popped off, I don't think I need to say that you're now driving your car with difficulty. It's kind of self-explanatory, right? But in this case, it just is even more emphasis on he made the Egyptians have a rough time. So we see that he halted the Egyptian army. He parted the Red Sea. He showed them pillars of cloud and fire and these 10 plagues. And these are things that all the Israelites saw. And what's really cool in that Exodus 14:25, after he talks about driving the chariots with difficulty, it says that the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." So even the Egyptians saw all that God was doing for the Israelites. In Exodus 14:26-28, that is immediately after what I just read, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand over the sea, and the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, on their chariots and on their horsemen.' And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. And when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained." So now the Israelites see the entire Egyptian army wiped out that was chasing them. Not a single one of them remained. So then we have the 10 plagues, the pillars of cloud and fire, the Red Sea parted, the Egyptian army halted, and then we see that they discover something else and are given something else by God. In Exodus 16:13-14, it says, "That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor." So this is manna, and this is manna and quail was provided by God. And that was provided because they were hungry. They were in the desert. They were in the wilderness, and they needed food. So now we see that the Israelites saw 10 plagues, ending with a Passover and deliverance, pillars of cloud and fire for guidance, the Red Sea parted, and the Egyptian army wiped out. This manna and quail provided whenever they needed it. And every morning they woke up to the manna, and they could send out their family to gather it. And they only needed to gather what they needed for that day. And then the next day, they could go out and get more. And they knew it was going to be there, and they saw it every morning. So then we see water come from a rock. So in Exodus 17:6, it says, "I," this is God speaking, "will stand there before you," he's talking to Moses, "by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. So the Israelites saw their thirst satisfied from an unexpected source, right? You don't think when you're thirsty, you think going to a spring or going to a river, but this is just a rock in a desert. That's something supernatural. So obviously God was behind it, and they saw this with their own eyes. The Israelite people, all of them saw this. So we have 10 plagues ending with a Passover and deliverance that they saw. Pillars of cloud and fire for guidance. Red Sea was parted. An Egyptian army was halted. Manna and quail was provided. They had water come from a rock. And then we see that they have victory over their enemies. So in Exodus 17:10-13, it says, "So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning." So I have another verse here to read, but think about that. Whenever he was holding his arms up, they would win, and whenever he would lay them back down, they would lose. So just think about for a second, out of this context, out of a war context, you're at a football game. And so you're going and watching your favorite football team, whatever it might be, the Colts, let's say. And whenever you're watching the Colts play, there's this random guy that's over in the corner, and if he has his arms up, the Colts are winning, but if he puts them back down, they're losing. And then you see over and time again, if he puts his arms down, they immediately start losing, and if he puts his arms back up, they immediately start dominating again. You would say that person has influence on this game. And that's the same thing that's happening here. This was not just a happenstance that they won the battle. I think it's very important that it adds in here that whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. Because otherwise it's just, oh, well, I guess the Israelites had a really good army, right? That they could beat the Amalekites. But no, it was directly based on what Moses was doing. And Moses, what he was doing was just a sign of what God was doing. So here we see very clear cut that God was providing for the Israelites and that all of them could see this victory over the Amalekites. I'm going to continue here in Exodus 17:12. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And so you could preach a whole sermon just on that short passage about being there for our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ and supporting them, but that's not this sermon, so we're going to keep on moving. And so we saw, what did the Israelites see? They saw the 10 plagues, and they saw the Passover, that being the last of those 10, and deliverance from their captors in Egypt. They saw the pillars of cloud and the pillars of fire for guidance every single day. They saw the Red Sea parted, and then the Egyptians get swallowed up by it. They saw manna and quail whenever they were hungry. They saw water come from a rock when they were thirsty. They saw victory over their enemies. And then they see the 10 Commandments given. In Deuteronomy 6:1-2, it says this: "These are the commands, decrees, and the laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land." This is Moses talking. "That you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life." So now we also, in here, obviously we're getting the 10 Commandments, and God is giving the 10 Commandments to his people. But we also see why they're in the wilderness to begin with, where they're going. And it says, "Teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess." This land is the promised land, right? It's also called the land of Canaan, and a few other names in the Bible, but it was the land that they are going to, the land flowing of milk and honey, this amazing place, the Disneyland, if you will, of the desert, that when they get there, they will be filled with as much good food and good land that they could possibly ever want. So that's where they're heading. And that land, we're going to see God is giving to them. So, here's what the Israelites saw. They saw 10 plagues ending with a Passover and deliverance from Egypt. They saw pillars of cloud and fire for guidance. They saw the Red Sea parted and Egyptian army halted. They saw manna and quail provided whenever they were hungry. They saw water come from a rock, victory over the Amalekites, 10 commandments to guide them. They saw all these things. And you know what, guys? This is what's so amazing that I loved when I was doing research to preach this sermon. All of these things happen. We think in our mind, we're like, okay, that's a long period of time. This all happened in about 100 days, everything that I just listed. This was not multiple generations that passed down stories to one another. This was not multiple years that they forgot about things. This was about 100 days from the Passover to the 10 Commandments and all that I just named in between. The Israelites could see God's hand working in mighty ways, but they weren't seeking him. And just a little bit more about the timeline, which I think is really cool. The water from the rock was about 40 days from the exodus of Egypt. Victory over the Amalekites was just 5 days later. And all these things seen were not, like I said before, passed from generation to generation. It was, they were seeing with their own eyes. So we're going to see now that we get into kind of the point and the meat of this message. And I know I've been going really fast, and that's for a reason, because I'm trying to get to the good part. So we're about to get to the point. And the point starts in Numbers 13. Starting in verse 25, it says, sorry, I'm actually going to start in 13, 1 and 2, just to give a little bit more context. It says, the Lord said to Moses, send some man to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So, what is happening here is they've made it to the land of Canaan. They've made it to the promised land. They're outside of it. And the Lord says to the Israelite people and to Moses, send some men, one from each of the 12 tribes, into the land of Canaan to explore it. Notice he's not saying, go see what you're up against. He's not saying, go see how hard it's going to be to capture the city. He's not saying, go see how many weapons you're going to need, how big of an army you're going to need. He said, just go explore the land. And so now we're getting into Numbers 13:25. It says, at the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. So they, that is those 12 men from the tribes, and we're going to see, of those 12, only 2 were very good guys, and the rest are kind of losers, honestly. And we'll see more about that in just a little bit. And again, to set some more context, at this point in our story, we're only about a year and a half after the Exodus. So everything that I said took place, and then they did some more traveling, and they made it to Canaan. They made it to the promised land. And we're only about a year and a half from them still being slaves. And every single day of that year and a half, they've seen God. Whether it be from manna, these pillars, the Red Sea, the 10 Commandments, with their own eyes, the individual Israelites, not just Moses, not just Caleb, not just Joshua, the individual Israelites saw God on a daily basis. So we get to the spies report in Numbers 13:26 through 32. It says, they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. So they went inside the land. They stole some of the fruit from the land and brought it back to all the Israelites to show them, and they said, yes, this is the place. You guys got to remember, they didn't have maps like we do today. They didn't have satellite imaging. They couldn't go like, oh, pull out your phone. Is this the place we're heading to? Is this a really nice area? No, they had to go and explore for themselves. And so they went in and they came back out and they said, yep, this is the place. This is definitely the promised land. No doubt about it. We have the spoils to prove it. And then continuing in verse 28, it says, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. These are all people that do not like the Israelites, and they're not going to get along with. This is not like they're going to say, okay, come on, welcome in, we'll be neighbors, we'll be friendly. So they know this is where they're supposed to be going, because it's obviously the land flowing with milk and honey. They've brought back all these spoils of the land to prove it, but they're getting scared. But then we see in verse 30, there's 2 of the spies that were not scared. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we had explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size." So Caleb is saying, listen, guys, did you not just hear what happened a few verses earlier? And of course, he didn't say that. The Bible had not been written yet at this point. But did you not hear what God told us in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 13? That we're supposed to go there because God is giving us this land? But the other 10, they said, listen, we're up against a lot. These are big people, mighty people, strong people. How are you going to tell us that we're just supposed to go in there and take it? And this is where we see that things start going south for the Israelite people, because they lose sight of that promise that they would have that land. The whole name of the land was the promised land. It was a promise to them. So Numbers 14, 1 through 11 says this, and that is following what we just read, but in the next chapter. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness." Think about that, guys. All that big long list of things that they saw every single day over about a year and a half after 430 years being held captive. They have water, they have food every day, they're surviving. They're seeing God provide for them in miraculous ways, and they get one bad news about this promised land that's amazing that they want to go to. And they say, we should have died in Egypt rather than been provided for every single day of our lives for the last year and a half with manna and been free people. Because of one bad report from a group of 12 spies. Why is the Lord, this is in verse 3, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So they weren't just talking about this, they were planning on doing it. They weren't just saying, oh man, we should have been back in Egypt. You know, that wasn't too bad, but we're probably going to die out here. No, they were like, we literally should be back in Egypt. Let's go back. Because at least we know what we're getting into. We know we're going to be beat. We know where we're going to be all these bad things, but we're used to it. We've been there for 430 years. That's better than being taken hostage in this foreign land. So, in verse 5 it says, then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. In verse 6 it says, Joshua, this is one of the two good spies, the other one was Caleb, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. So unfortunately, Moses, Aaron, Caleb, and Joshua are all the only ones of the Israelites that are saying, were you guys not watching for this last year and a half? Did you not watch when the Egyptian army was coming through the Red Sea and they were completely demolished by God's hand? Did you not see when Moses was holding up his hands when we were fighting the Amalekites that we were winning? And when he put his hands down, we weren't winning. That was God working for us. Did you guys not see any of that? Because we did. We were living it. We know you were living it. And listen, all these signs and all these actions that God did for the Israelites, these were not things that just Moses saw. Even when Moses came off Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, we think, okay, that was Moses and God alone. No, Moses, his face was shining because of the glory of God. Guess who got to see that? It wasn't Moses. It was everybody around Moses. That was for the Israelites' sake, not for Moses' sake. So then we get to verse 10. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. That is Moses, Aaron, Joshua, and Caleb. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. This is where it gets scary. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I have performed among them?" So this is why I had to go really quick at the beginning of this sermon and cover all of that, because if I just got to this point and said, in spite of all the signs I've performed among them, you guys would be like, okay, the 10 Commandments, cool. No. These were daily signs, miraculous signs, many signs. And God said, enough's enough. If you can't trust me through all of that, why should I even bless you anymore? So now we get to the consequence. This is in Numbers 14, 26 through 35, just skipping a couple verses down. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall. Every one of you, 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected." There's so much packed in that passage. First, we have the land that you rejected. It's not the land that you didn't want to take. It's literally God said, here's this present of this land, and they said, no, thank you. Also, their children that they thought would be tormented, abused by these people, yeah, they're the ones that are going to get to enjoy it after you're dead. And in verse 32, it says this, "But as for you, your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lie in the wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land. You will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you." This is probably one of the scariest passages in the Bible, in my opinion. God's literally saying to the people, he blessed beyond measure his chosen people. Hey, guess what? Now you're going to know what it's like to be on the Amalekite side, to be on the Egyptian side, to be on the Canaanite side. You're going to know what it's like to be in a place that you don't have daily blessings, in a place you don't have daily sight of God. In verse 35, it says this, "I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community, which is banded together against me. They will meet their end in the wilderness. Here they will die." So just to recap, a lot of times when we think of the 40 years in the wilderness, we think, okay, in that 40 years, there was manna. In that 40 years, Moses struck the rock. In that 40 years, we got the 10 Commandments. No, all of that was that year and a half. This 40 years was filled with suffering. So a couple months ago, we had a lock-in at our church, and I'm the youth director, so I was there for the lock-in, and one of the youth, it was great, it's one of my favorite quotes that I've ever had a youth tell me. I was explaining something, and the youth just was not registering it, it didn't seem like, so I asked him, I said, you getting what I'm saying? And he said this, he said, I'm listening to you, Nick. I'm just not remembering. So, maybe this whole sermon, you've been listening but not remembering. this is the point you need to start remembering. Even after seeing all that God had done for them, because the Israelites were not seeking God, they missed the blessing. Though small, that K makes a big difference between seeing and seeking. That's the title of this message. Are you missing a K? Because the Israelites saw, they were seeing every day. But unfortunately, they weren't seeking. So just to recap everything that they saw the 10 plagues ending with the Passover and deliverance. That was the Nile turned to blood, the frogs covering the land, the gnats covering the people, the flies filling the houses, the Egyptian livestock dying, the boils breaking out, the hail beating down the crops, the locusts devouring the plants, the darkness covering the land, every firstborn son dying, pillars of cloud and fire for guidance, Red Sea parted and the Egyptian army halted through it, manna and quail provided on a daily basis, water coming from a rock, victory over the Amalekites, the 10 Commandments, all in a year and a half. And these people still said, nah. One bad report from 10 individuals trumps all of that we saw with our own eyes. So what difference does a K make? It saves 40 years. It saves 40 years of wondering. It saves 40 years of waiting on death. It saves 40 years with no purpose. 40 years with no point of existing. And unfortunately, how many of us here in this room see God on a daily basis? Maybe not in these grand, miraculous acts, but we see him working in our lives. We see when prayers are answered in miraculous ways. We feel his presence during worship. But unfortunately, we don't have that K, most of us. And it may not even be just 40 years. Maybe you're in here and I don't know what the youngest person is in here, 20 years old. You might have 60 years. You might have 80 years. And guess what? Those are going to be 80 years spent wandering, 80 years waiting on death, 80 years with no purpose, 80 years with no point of existing, just like the Israelites that were not seeking. So are you going to be someone who just sees God working, or someone who seeks God's will for their life and trusts him when he calls you to step out in faith? If you add the K to your life, it will save the rest of your life. You might be like the Israelites and see God working and moving all around you, but have never added that K. You might be a person that says, look at what God is doing, but when he calls on you, you say, let's go back to Egypt. God changed his blessings to curses, not based on what they saw, but who they sought. So in conclusion, I'm going to read out of the New Testament in Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That verse doesn't say those who see of his greatness, those who say to their neighbors at church, look at what all of God has done during this week in our church life or my family's life or my personal life. No. He rewards those who earnestly seek him. This is a really interesting thing. The Israelites in the Old Testament are God's chosen people, right? There's something pretty cool. When we get to the New Testament, we find that you are God's chosen people. Because in John 3:16 it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." Guess what? That's all of you. That's everybody down the street. That's everybody in Russia. That's everybody in Ukraine. That's everybody on this earth. So, Couple questions. Are you seeking God? Have you put your faith in him? And I'll leave you with this. Seeing is based on sight, but seeking is based in faith. I'll say that one more time. Seeing is based on sight, but seeking is based in faith. So, one final question. Are you missing a K? So, I don't want to leave a chance for you guys to walk out of this building without knowing how you can get that K. And it probably looks different for every single person in here, but it all starts in the same place for all of us. And that is by giving your life over to Christ. By becoming a Christian, by letting him rule every day of your life and saying that you believe in him no matter what. So if you need to do that, make sure you don't leave this building without doing that. It might be that you need to rededicate your life and say, I've been seeing God working in this church and other churches, in my life, in my family's life, in other people's lives, but I haven't been seeking him. So I just need to rededicate my life. Maybe you just need to refocus. Maybe you've tried to been seeking, but you're just not focusing in the right areas. Maybe you need to realign. Just make sure you are on the right path. Or maybe you just need to relinquish your burdens to God. Whatever it is, I'm going to ask Brother Brett to come up and bring us a short invitation here. I'll be sitting on the front pew. If you want to come talk to me, that's fine. Or if you just want to talk afterwards, or if you want to do something where you're sitting in the pews, that's perfectly fine. But really, I want you to ask yourself, are you missing a K?